Well, there's stunning footage that's emerged of the infamous Titanic shipwreck. 110 years after its tragic fate, the Ocean Gate expedition captured the high-quality footage of the capsized crew sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
A camera just went down to the Titanic and came back with something nobody was ready for. A burn mark, 30 feet long, scorched directly into the hull before the ship ever left port. And what caused it is genuinely devastating. 6 warnings were sent before the Titanic ever struck anything. For 110 years, the world was told a simple story. The iceberg acted alone. This footage just proved that was never the truth. And what it reveals about what was actually happening on that ship before it ever sank will leave you speechless. The ship that was already dying. Nobody told the passengers. That is the thing that sits heaviest when you understand what was actually happening below their feet. The people who boarded the Titanic at Southampton on April 10, 1912 walked up that gangway smiling. They waved from the railings. They found their cabins and unpacked their clothes and went to dinner and talked about New York. They had no idea that deep in the belly of the ship beneath them, men were losing a battle they had been fighting for days. A fire had started inside the Titanic before it ever left Belfast. It began in coal bunker number 6, a room 3 stories tall packed with hundreds of tons of black coal. Coal can catch fire on its own when stored in large quantities and exposed to air. It smolders slowly from the inside, building heat so gradually that by the time anyone notices, the fire has already eaten deep into the pile. That is what happened, quietly, invisibly. While the most famous ship in the world was being prepared for its maiden voyage, something was burning in its chest. 12 men were sent down to stop it. Picture those men. They are not engineers in clean rooms. They are firemen and stokers with burned hands and coal-black faces, men who have spent their lives in the heat and noise of engine rooms. They know fire. They went down into that bunker and attacked it the only way you can fight a coal fire, by shoveling the burning coal out of the pile and feeding it into the furnaces so there is nothing left to burn. It sounds straightforward. It was not. Every shovelful they removed, the fire found more coal behind it. The heat coming off that pile was ferocious. The air inside that bunker was thick and suffocating and so hot it felt like pressing your face against an open furnace. The men worked in shifts because no human body could stay in those conditions for long. They came out drenched, their skin raw, their lungs wrecked, and then they went back in, again and again, for days. The fire did not care. John Dilley was one of those men. He survived the disaster, and he talked about what happened in that bunker. He said there were hundreds of tons of coal stored there. He said they made no headway against it. He said from the day they sailed, the Titanic was on fire. From the day they sailed, the Titanic was on fire. The White Star Line knew. They knew before the ship left Southampton. The fire had been burning for over a week. The officers knew, the management knew, and the decision was made to sail anyway. The coal strike of 1912 had already caused problems. Coal had been stripped from other ships just to fuel this voyage. The competition from German shipping lines was fierce. Tickets had been sold. The press was watching. A delay would cost money and confidence at exactly the wrong moment. So, they sent a burning ship into the North Atlantic and told nobody. Now here is where it gets worse. An Irish journalist named Sinan Moloney spent years researching the Titanic. He came across a collection of photographs sitting in an attic in England for over a century, taken by the engineering chief of Harland and Wolff before the ship left Belfast. When Moloney examined them, he found something that stopped him completely cold. On the hull of the Titanic, photographed before it ever left port, was a black streak, approximately 30 feet long. Engineers from Imperial College London examined it and said it was consistent with extreme heat damage caused by a fire burning directly behind that section of hull. That streak was not a shadow. It was burn damage on the outside of the ship's body, caused by a fire so intense it cooked the hull from within. And here is the detail that should make your stomach drop. That burned section was located at the exact spot where the Titanic later struck the iceberg. One day before the collision, when the fire was finally put out, firemen inspecting the damage found the steel bulkhead behind the burned section had deformed. The intense heat had warped the metal wall designed to stop the ocean from flooding the compartments if the hull was ever breached. It was already bent and weakened before the ship hit anything. The men who saw that knew what it meant. They said nothing. And then someone made one final decision. The Titanic was designed to carry 64 lifeboats. The number was cut to 20 because someone decided more would make the deck look cluttered. The extra lifeboats would have cost $16,000. The ship cost $7.5 million. They did not buy them. On April 10, 1912, in front of 100,000 cheering people, the Titanic left Southampton, its hull weakened by fire, its watertight bulkhead already warped, 20 lifeboats instead of 64. And the people who knew all of this stood on the dock and watched it go and said absolutely nothing. The passengers waved from the railings. They had no idea they were already in trouble. Chapter 2. The warnings nobody listened to. The Titanic did not sail into danger blind. That is what makes this chapter so hard to sit with, because you could almost forgive a disaster that came from nowhere. A freak accident, a thing nobody saw coming. But that is not what this was. The Titanic sailed into danger fully informed. 6 separate ships sent 6 separate warnings on April 14, 1912 alone. 6 different captains in 6 different messages, all saying the same thing. There is ice directly ahead of you. Something terrible is waiting. None of it worked. The first warning came in the morning from a ship called the Coronia. The message described large icebergs, smaller chunks of floating ice called growlers, and a massive field of ice sitting directly in the Titanic's path. Captain Edward Smith read it. His documented response was to say thank you. He did not change course. He did not reduce speed. He did not order more lookouts to the front of the ship. He folded the message, put it in his pocket, and the Titanic kept moving at full speed toward the exact coordinates the Coronia had just described. A Dutch ship called the Noordam sent another warning. Same ice field, same location, same danger. Smith acknowledged it politely and did nothing. More warnings came through the day, each one more urgent than the last, each one ignored. Then came the one that should have stopped everything. A ship called the Masaba sent a message that described an enormous field of ice and massive icebergs sitting directly across the Titanic's intended route. Not near it, directly across it. The message was so detailed and so alarming that if it had reached the bridge, it would have been impossible to dismiss. But it never reached the bridge. The wireless operators were completely overwhelmed processing personal messages from wealthy passengers, birthday greetings and stock market updates, and social telegrams that the first-class passengers were paying to send. The Masaba's warning sat with the wireless operators, undelivered, while the Titanic steamed full speed toward the exact field of ice it described. Now step away from the ship for a moment. 2 days before the collision, a captain named W. Wood was sailing his ship, the SS Etonian, through that same stretch of the North Atlantic. He was a man who loved photography. He had his camera with him, and at some point on April 12, 1912, he looked out from his ship and saw something enormous rising from the water ahead of him, a massive iceberg. He stopped and he took a photograph of it. He noted the geographic coordinates in his log. Then he sailed on, grateful his ship had spotted it in daylight and had plenty of time to navigate around it. When Captain Wood reached New York, he had the photograph developed, and he wrote a letter to his grandfather. He wrote, "I am sending you a sea picture, the Etonian running before a gale and the iceberg that sank the Titanic. We crossed the ice tracks 40 hours before her, and in daylight so saw the ice easily, and I got a picture." He was so certain about what he had photographed that he said it plainly. The iceberg that sank the Titanic. The coordinates he noted matched almost exactly the coordinates where the Titanic would strike an iceberg 40 hours later. He sent that photograph home like a postcard, and for 108 years it sat in a box in a family collection, the closest thing that exists to a direct photograph of the specific piece of ice that killed 1,500 people, identified and labeled by the man who took it, gathering dust in a box while the world spent a century debating what the iceberg looked like. It was sold at auction in 2020, but there is one more piece of this that is almost impossible to process. While the Titanic was sending distress signals and filling lifeboats and breaking apart in the North Atlantic, another ship was close enough to see it happening. The SS Californian was in those same waters that night. Multiple crew members on the Californian saw bright lights in the distance. They saw distress rockets being fired into the sky. They reported what they were seeing to their captain, Stanley Lord. Captain Lord went back to sleep. The British inquiry later concluded the Californian was somewhere between 5 and 10 nautical miles from the sinking Titanic, close enough to reach it in time to pull people from the water, close enough that the crew could see the rockets going up. Captain Lord denied seeing anything that night. His own crew's testimony destroyed that denial from every direction. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, a lookout named Frederick Fleet spotted the iceberg from the crow's nest and rang the warning bell 3 times. The Titanic began to turn. The engines were thrown into reverse. It was too late. The ship had been warned 6 times that day, and it had kept moving. And now the thing it had been warned about was filling the entire view from the bow. The night everything broke. The collision did not sound like what you would expect. People who were awake described it as a shudder, a grinding scrape that ran through the length of the ship and then stopped. Some said it felt like the ship had rolled over something. A few passengers who were still awake thought it was nothing. One man said it sounded like the ship had shed an anchor chain. People in their cabins felt a slight vibration and went back to sleep. That is how gently 1,500 people were sent to their deaths. What actually happened beneath the waterline was far from gentle. The iceberg scraped along the Titanic's starboard bow for approximately 10 seconds. That was all it took. 6 seams in the hull plates burst open. The total gap in the hull was approximately 1 square meter, 12 square feet. That sounds almost small. It was not small, because the water that poured through those 12 square feet came in faster than the ship's watertight compartments were ever designed to handle. 5 compartments flooded. The Titanic was built to survive 4. It was over before most people on board even knew it had started. Dr. Washington Dodge was a physician from San Francisco traveling with his wife Ruth and their young son. He was in his cabin when the collision happened. The impact woke him. He lay there for a moment listening to the silence and decided it was nothing. His wife agreed. They tried to go back to sleep. Something would not let him. He got up, put on his clothes, and walked out into the corridor to find out what had happened. A crew member told him everything was fine. There was nothing to worry about. He almost believed it. He went back to his cabin, lay down again, and then something in his chest told him to get up a second time. On his second trip into the corridor, the mood had changed completely. Crew members who had been calm minutes earlier were moving fast now, their faces tight, their eyes giving away everything their words were trying to hide. Someone pressed a life jacket into his hands. He looked at it. He looked at the face of the man who had given it to him. He understood then. He ran back to his cabin, got his wife and son up, and started moving toward the upper decks. What he saw as he climbed through the ship he later described in a letter written aboard the rescue ship Carpathia, his handwriting shaking so badly in places it was almost unreadable. He described passengers wandering the corridors confused and half-dressed. He described crew members trying to stay calm while everything around them was starting to come apart. He described the specific horror of realizing that the people in charge of keeping everyone alive were just as frightened as everyone else. Up on the boat deck, the lifeboats were being uncovered. There were 20 of them. They could hold 1,178 people total. There were the 2,209 people on board. The mathematics of that were already a death sentence before a single boat hit the water. But what happened next made it so much worse. Lifeboat 7 was the first one launched. It had a capacity of 65 people. Officers tried to get passengers to board, but many refused. Standing on a ship that still felt solid beneath their feet, looking down at a small wooden boat dangling over black freezing water far below. Lifeboat 7 went down with 28 people in it. 37 empty seats dropped away into the dark. Then came Lifeboat 1. It had a capacity of 40. It was launched with 12 people inside. 12. Among them were Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon and his wife Lady Duff Gordon, 2 of the wealthiest people on board. They sat in a boat built for 40 with 11 other people and were lowered away from the ship. When the Titanic finally went under, the screaming of the people in the water was loud enough to reach every lifeboat floating nearby. Lifeboat 1 did not go back. Later testimony at the British inquiry suggested that Sir Cosmo had offered the crew members in the boat £5 each. He said it was to compensate them for the personal belongings they had lost when the ship went down. His critics called it something else entirely. They called it a payment to stay away from the wreck. Whether it was or not, the result was the same. A boat with 28 empty seats sat floating in the dark while people screamed and died in the water close enough to hear. Across the entire disaster, 40% of available lifeboat spaces went unfilled. 472 empty seats floated away from a ship full of people who needed them. And then there was the drill. A lifeboat drill had been scheduled for April 14, 1912, the same day as the collision. Captain Smith canceled it that morning to allow passengers to attend church services. That drill would have been the first time most crew members practiced loading and lowering boats with real people in real conditions. When the emergency came that night, crew members were operating equipment they had never practiced using in the dark with passengers who had no idea where to go. On a ship that had held no safety drills at any point during the entire voyage, the result was chaos that cost lives that did not need to be lost. By 2:17 a.m., the Titanic's structure gave out completely. The middle of the ship cracked with a sound witnesses described as a cannon shot heard across the water. The stern rose up out of the ocean, almost vertical, hundreds of people clinging to railings and ropes and anything they could grab. Then it plunged. The water temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. A person in that water without a lifeboat had minutes before their body simply stopped. Only one lifeboat went back. One. Fifth Officer Lowe had consolidated passengers between boats and returned to the wreck site to search for survivors. He found a small number of people still alive. The rest of the lifeboats stayed exactly where they were, floating in the dark with their empty seats, while the people in them listened to 1,500 human beings die and did not move a single oar. The last section of the Titanic disappeared beneath the surface at 2:20 a.m. The water went quiet. The lifeboats sat in the dark. And somewhere in all of that silence, 1,500 people who had boarded a ship 6 days earlier, believing they were sailing to New York, were gone. The men who knew and said nothing. When the sun came up on April 15, 1912, the people who had made the decisions that killed 1,500 people were still alive. They were on rescue ships and in offices and in the headquarters of the White Star Line, and the first thing they did was start thinking about what they were going to say. Because when that many people die, someone asks questions. And when someone asks questions, the people with the most to lose start working on their answers. 2 inquiries were launched, one in America, one in Britain. The American inquiry was run by Senator William Alden Smith. He moved fast and hit hard. He met the rescue ship Carpathia at the dock in New York before it even finished unloading survivors and served legal notices on crew members before they could board ships back to England. He called 82 witnesses. He asked brutal questions. His final report criticized the White Star Line, criticized the captain, and specifically tore apart the British Board of Trade for what he called laxity of regulation and hasty inspection. The American inquiry did not let anyone off easily. Then there was the British inquiry. And this is where the story takes a turn that should make your blood run cold. The British inquiry was overseen by a man named Lord Mersey, formerly known as John Charles Bigham, a High Court judge with a long history in shipping law. It ran from May 2 to July 3, 2012. Nearly 100 witnesses were called. More than 25,000 questions were asked across 42 days of hearings. It looked thorough. It looked serious. It looked like justice being done. Sinan Maloney, the journalist who found the attic photographs, has made a specific and documented allegation about what was actually happening inside that inquiry room. He states that Lord Mersey was a shipping interest judge who 4 years before the disaster had stood at a toast at the Shipwrights Guild and said the words, "May nothing ever adversely affect the great carrying power of this wonderful country." Think about what that means. The man running the inquiry into the worst maritime disaster in history had stood in a room full of shipping industry figures 4 years earlier and publicly wished for nothing to ever hurt the British shipping industry. And now here he was, deciding what the world would be told about why 1,500 people had died on a British ship owned by a British company. Maloney's allegation is specific and on record, published by the Smithsonian. It is his documented claim, not a confirmed legal finding. But it sits alongside a fact that is completely confirmed. When Lord Mersey published his final report on July 30, 1912, it concluded that the iceberg acted alone, the fire that 12 men could not extinguish for days, the fire that burned so intensely it left a 30-foot black mark on the outside of the hull. The fire that warped the steel bulkhead at the exact point of future impact. The fire that John Dilley said was burning from the day they sailed. All of it was reduced to a footnote, and then Lord Mersey's final report stepped over that footnote and told the world the iceberg acted alone. Now here is the institutional detail that makes this even darker. The British Board of Trade was the organization responsible for certifying the Titanic as seaworthy before it ever left Southampton. It was the same organization that oversaw the British inquiry into its sinking. The very body that had approved the ship, that had signed off on its safety, that had allowed it to sail with 20 lifeboats instead of 64, was now in a significant position of oversight over the investigation into what went wrong. Senator William Alden Smith in America had called that organization out by name for laxity and hasty inspection. In Britain, that same organization was helping to run the inquiry. The people checking the answers were the same people who had written the questions. And then there was the lifeboat decision. The inquiry noted that the Titanic did not have enough lifeboats. It attributed this to outdated safety regulations. It noted that the regulations had not been updated since 1894, and that they were based on the gross tonnage of a ship rather than the number of people on board. All of that is true, but here is what the inquiry did not dwell on. The original chief designer of the Titanic, a man named Alexander Carlisle, had specifically planned for 48 lifeboats, enough to get close to the full passenger capacity off the ship in an emergency. That number was cut to 20, not because of regulations, not because of structural limitations, because someone decided that 48 lifeboats would make the deck look too cluttered for a luxury liner. That decision had a name. That decision had a face. That decision was made in a specific room by specific people who knew exactly how many passengers the ship was going to carry. The inquiry cited the regulations and moved on. The name and the face went unmentioned. And then there was John Dilley. Dilley and other engine room workers had given accounts after the disaster describing the fire in detail. Their words were part of the public record. The testimony existed. The photographs of the scorch mark existed, sitting in an attic in England waiting for someone to find them. The deformed bulkhead had been seen by firemen the day before the collision. The truth was not hidden in a locked room somewhere. It was sitting in plain sight inside the very inquiry that was supposed to be uncovering it. And Lord Mersey looked at all of it and concluded the iceberg acted alone. The White Star Line was not found criminally liable. The people who had built a burning ship, stripped it of lifeboats, ignored 6 ice warnings, canceled the safety drill, and then shaped the inquiry that followed, walked away. They gave their testimony. They collected their papers. And for over a century, the world largely believed what it was told. What the photographs finally proved. The truth about the Titanic did not die on April 15, 1912. It went into hiding. It crawled into attics inside old photograph albums. It sank to the bottom of the North Atlantic inside the rivets of a broken hull. It sat in a wooden box in a family home inside an envelope with a photograph and a letter written by a man who had seen exactly what was coming and had no way to warn the people it was coming for. The truth did not disappear. It waited. And one by one, across more than a century, the pieces started coming back up. The first piece came from an attic in England. Sinan Maloney had spent decades researching the Titanic. He had written books about it. He had gone through inquiry transcripts and survivor accounts and historical records, and had always felt that the official story had a hole in it, that the iceberg acting alone never quite explained everything. Then a few years ago, he found the photographs. They had been taken by the engineering chief of Harland and Wolff, the company that built the Titanic. The man had documented the ship in extraordinary detail during its construction and preparation. When he died, the photographs passed to his family. They sat in a collection for over a century, unseen, unknown, gathering dust in the kind of quiet darkness where inconvenient truths tend to survive. When Maloney went through them, he found the streak. A black mark on the hull of the Titanic, approximately 30 feet long, photographed before the ship ever left Belfast. He brought in engineers from Imperial College London. They examined the mark carefully and said it was consistent with extreme heat damage caused by a fire burning directly behind that section of hull from the inside. Not paint, not shadow, not a reflection. Burn damage, cooked into the outside of the ship's body by a fire raging inside it. And it was located at the exact spot where the iceberg struck. Moloney made a documentary. It aired on Channel 4 in the United Kingdom on January 1, 2017, and on the Smithsonian Channel in the United States 3 weeks later. It did not solve every question about the Titanic, but it blew open something that Lord Mersey's inquiry had sealed shut in 1912. The fire was real. The hull damage was visible and photographed. The location was not a coincidence. And the people who built that ship and sent it into the North Atlantic knew all of this before a single passenger ever stepped on board. The second piece came from a family box in 2020. Captain W. Wood had taken his photograph of the iceberg on April 12, 1912, 2 days before the collision. He had noted the coordinates. He had sailed on to New York, developed the photograph, and written his letter. He was completely certain about what he had captured. He said it plainly, the iceberg that sank the Titanic. He sent it home to his grandfather and went back to his life. His grandfather kept it. His family kept it. For 108 years, it sat in a private collection while the world spent those same 108 years debating what the iceberg looked like, producing sketches and paintings, and competing theories about its size and shape and exact location. The answer was in a box the whole time. When the photograph was finally sold at auction by Henry Aldridge and Son in England in 2020, the auctioneer said something that landed hard. He said there were never any photographs taken on board the Titanic of the iceberg itself, only images of ones in the same area in the days before and after. But Captain Wood's photograph, with its matching coordinates and his own written certainty, is the closest thing that exists to a direct image of the specific piece of ice that ended 1,500 lives. It was estimated to sell for £12,000, 108 years. A box. A postcard a man sent home to his grandfather. That is where the most important photograph in the entire Titanic story was hiding. The third piece came from the ocean floor. In 1998, a metallurgist named Tim Fuka, working for the United States government's National Institute of Standards and Technology, performed a detailed analysis on iron rivets recovered from the Titanic's debris field at the bottom of the North Atlantic. What he found was not what anyone had expected. The wrought iron in the bow rivets, the rivets holding together the section of hull that struck the iceberg, contained 3 times today's allowable amount of slag. Slag is the glassy waste material left behind when iron ore is smelted. In small amounts, it is normal. In the concentrations Fuka found, it makes iron brittle, especially in cold temperatures. Temperatures like those of the North Atlantic in April 1912. When the iceberg struck the Titanic's bow, the rivets in that section did not bend under the pressure the way properly made rivets should have. They snapped. Their heads broke off cleanly. The seams they were holding together burst open, 6 of them. 12 square feet of open hull on the largest ship in the world. And through those 12 square feet, the North Atlantic poured in faster than anything on that ship was designed to stop. The unsinkable ship was not brought down by a massive gash torn open by the iceberg. It was brought down by 12 square feet of failed iron, held together with rivets that were 3 times more brittle than they should have been. Harland and Wolff disputes these findings. Other experts have raised questions about aspects of the study, but the NIST analysis remains the most detailed and rigorous metallurgical examination of actual Titanic materials ever conducted. And what it found is that the bow of that ship, the section that hit the iceberg, the section that bore the burn mark from the coal fire, was built with iron that should never have been used. The fourth piece came from the water itself. In recent years, a deep water specialist company called Magellan completed the first full digital scan of the entire Titanic wreck. The project collected 16 terabytes of data and over 715,000 high-quality photographs and videos. For the first time in history, the entire wreck could be seen as a single, complete object. Not sections glimpsed through a submersible porthole, not isolated photographs of the bow or the stern or the debris field. Everything. The full picture of what the Titanic looks like now, lying in 2 broken pieces on the ocean floor 13,000 feet below the surface, examined in complete detail. What the scan shows about the specific damage pattern, where the hull gave way and where it held, where the break between the bow and stern happened and how, is still being analyzed by researchers. The full implications of what those 715,000 photographs reveal about the sequence of events on the night of April 14, 1912 are still being worked through. The complete picture is not finished yet. But here is what all four pieces taken together have already proved. The Titanic was not undone by one disaster. It was undone by a series of decisions made by people who valued schedule and money and appearance over the lives of the people in their care. The fire was known and hidden. The hull damage was photographed and buried in an attic. The lifeboat shortage was chosen deliberately and then blamed on outdated regulations. The warnings were received and ignored. The drill was canceled. The inquiry was shaped. And then the world was told that the iceberg acted alone, and for over a century, most of the world believed it. But the photographs in that attic did not lie. The rivets on the ocean floor did not lie. The letter Captain Wood wrote to his grandfather did not lie. The truth was always there, sitting in boxes and attics and on the bottom of the ocean, waiting for someone to go looking. And what it says clearly and without any room for argument is this: over 1,500 people died on April 14, 1912. The iceberg did not kill them. The decisions did. Decisions made in boardrooms and design offices and inquiry chambers by people who went home afterward and lived out the rest of their lives, while 1,500 others did not. The photographs say so. The medal says so. And now you know so too.